Welcome back to Hot Takes, the motorcycle show for busy people who love motorcycles. And today we're going to talk about, has MotoGP become boring racing? And should you be watching it in 2025? Today we are bringing the statistics. I have graphs, I'm analyzing it, and we're going to tell you, it has MotoGP become boring. Last year at Japan, at Motegi, Marc Marquez famously said that was a super boring race. He clarified and said that it was because there were not many overtakes, and he said he loves overtakes. And we all know that. Marc likes overtaking people. So what do people mean when they say that MotoGP has become boring? Well, number one, there are not as many overtakes as in previous years. And why is that? Well, the technology. I believe the number one culprit for that has to do with aerodynamics. So what you see in racing is that a faster rider will catch up to a slower rider very quickly, and then they sit right behind them for quite some time and struggle to get around them. Why is that? Well, just like we see in Formula One, you have aero kits that are providing downforce, and they increase the braking going into your turn. And the guy who's behind is in the dirty air, and so he has worse braking performance than the guy ahead, which means he struggles to overtake. Another issue that we deal with is the fact that Ducati has become so dominant. So let's look at the numbers on that and see, is Ducati really so dominant? Is it getting any better? And we'll also look at the talk between the old bike and the new bike, and is the new bike really any better than the old? So let's dive into the numbers. If we look at the rise of Ducati from 2020 until now, we see a straight line upward trajectory when it comes to podiums and when it comes to wins. They have a very clear advantage, and they just keep stretching that advantage more and more. In my data, these are percentage of wins, taking into account sprint races just like other races. So when you go before to the earlier races, there were way less podiums, but percentages don't lie, and that's really the thing that we should look at. So when was the rise of Ducati? In 2020, everyone was very, very even. Marc got hurt, and he was on a Honda, which really wasn't that good of a bike, but he had ridden it very well for so long that it looked better than it was. And so you have all the manufacturers very close together, all vying for wins, vying for podiums, and it was a very, very close championship. Then in 2021, we see that the Ducati jumps to the front. The 2021 Ducati was very, very good, and it was a big step forward. And then in 2022, we have another big step forward. Now, it should be noted that in 2023, that Ducati then had 8 bikes on the grid, which is way more than anyone else. And Yamaha went down to 2 bikes, and we lost Suzuki. So that was a really big change, and it also enabled them to maintain this big advantage. 2022 was also the last year that we see Honda and Yamaha being somewhat competitive and getting wins and getting podiums. Starting in 2023 and 2024, we see the Japanese manufacturers get nothing, almost no podiums, and 0 wins. And so they start really, really struggling. Also in 2022, we saw Aprilia had a really good year. They got 16% of the podiums. That's when Aleix was on the podium a lot. In 2023 and 2024, Aprilia only got 8% of the podiums. And so it felt like they were really underperforming, and it turns out they were. They did half as well as they did in 2022. Are they doing better now? Not really. So we're 8 races in, and they only have 1 podium. Aprilia has 1 podium, which is the win that Bezzecchi took, and KTM is sitting with 0 podiums. Honda with 1 win, actually 2 podiums, right? One of those being a win from Johan Zarco. Yamaha has 1 second place that Quartararo got, and then he was robbed of a win when his ride height device failed over at Silverstone. So Silverstone was an excellent race. We saw a lot of mix-ups, a lot of stuff going on. The Japanese manufacturers, namely Honda, has taken a big step forward, and they're much closer to the front than they were in 2023 and 2024. So in the future, there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe we will see other manufacturers being competitive and doing better, but so far, it's the same. In 2023, Ducati had 70% of the podiums. 2024 was 80%, and this year is 92%. But keeping in mind, this year they have Marc Marquez on the fastest bike, and Alex Marquez is really in good form. He's riding the 2024 very, very good. And clearly the 2024 was a phenomenal bike. It was much better than the 2023, and they continue to move that goalpost and be competitive. Those of us who were watching MotoGP back in 2018 and 2019 might remember that Marquez was so dominant, and the racing and the championship was a little bit boring because it was really no contest. And so I had to look back then, and in 2018, he took home 56% of the wins in the year. And in 2019, he took home 63% of the wins. That's nothing compared to 90% of the wins, essentially, that Ducati got in 2023, 2024, and so far in 2025. So the Ducati domination is way more than what Marquez had back in the day. So there's a lot of talk about the riders on last year's bike versus this year's bike. And ever since 2022, we've had riders come in on last year's bike and beat the current bike. And so everyone's questioning, is the new bike any better? Sometimes the factory riders, they complain a lot and they make it sound like the new bike is not very good. But the reality is that based on the numbers, the newer bikes have continued to be better. No matter what they complain about and what they struggle with, we see a clear upward trajectory. Now, like I said before, one thing to keep in mind, a lot of times we have the better riders on those faster bikes. And so it might make them look better. However, in 2024, Mark was on the old bike and he was struggling to keep up. And he wasn't. It was clear that he wasn't beating the factory guys, Martin and Bagnaia. However, he's on the current bike and he's mopping the floor with Bagnaia now and making him look bad. Rider makes a huge difference. Yes, bike makes a huge difference. Looking forward, what do we have to look forward to? Well, for one, the European manufacturers are going to have a struggle staying competitive going into 2026 because they're going to be limited to the parts that they have, while the other manufacturers, the Japanese, will be able to do a little bit more development. But the question is, will they even try? Because Yamaha has made it clear that they're going to stop developing the M1 very soon, and they're going to focus all their energy on the V4. Now, the V4, when you come out with a completely new engine, even if it's powerful, even if it's very good, you have to develop the whole chassis around it. And so getting a good package out of it might take a couple of years. So I wouldn't expect too much out of Yamaha for a little while. Honda seems set to be competitive. And I do believe that when those new regulations come in 2027, that we're going to see a much more level playing field. They're going to rein in that aero that is causing it to be difficult to overtake. And this should make the racing better. Ride height devices will also be banned in 2025. And that has been a source of Ducati domination. They have very good ride height devices, and essentially what those do is makes your bike better at acceleration. But what happens is when you're designing a bike, you always have a trade-off. A longer bike doesn't wheelie as much, you can put more power to the ground and you have more straight line. If you look at drag bikes, they're very, very long, right? But then you come to a turn and then they're difficult to turn. So what a ride height device does is it lowers the whole bike down, lowering the center of gravity, keeping that wheelie off, and allowing you to put down that mechanical grip and go faster. Then when the corner arrives, you lift the bike back up and you can go through the turn. And so you get the best of both worlds, your short wheelbase turning and your low, long bike for going fast, right? And acceleration. And while it's a marvel of technology, it has caused some problems. Namely, at Silverstone, it didn't disengage for Alex Marquez, causing an accident. And then Quartararo got out of the race because his lowered itself down and would not raise again. So they're a problem. They need to go away. Even though they're really cool technology, they are not making the racing better. They're making the racing worse. So this is going to be an advantage with new engines, smaller capacity engines. We have a chance for those Japanese to catch back up and the racing to get a lot more even. Less aero means more rider input, more rider control, and less about aerodynamics and technology. So we're looking forward to that, but we're hoping for a little bit better racing in the last half of 2025, although it's hard to imagine Marc Marquez not dominating completely and his brother coming in second. But we'll see. Maybe Pecco Bagnaia can come out with something. Maybe somebody else can do something. What do you think? Who's going to be most dominant after Marc in 2025? Let us know in the comments and join us again next time on Hot Takes, the motorcycle show for busy people who love motorcycles.